But today we're going to learn a little more about how to measure the value of learning within your organization. And what we'll have for our agenda today is we'll do a quick introduction of your host, David Dang, and my colleague here, Scott Wolslager. We'll go through the poll results that was performed just now live, and see if we have some interesting topics to discuss from there. We'll also discuss different industry trends that we're seeing that relates to learning and development. The last couple of years have been very challenging, and it's been bring some really interesting insights on how organizations set up their learning, and maybe some current challenges that we're starting to see that are that's coming through the cracks. We'll also dig a little bit deeper in terms of how we measure the value of learning, encourage continued learning, and a couple frameworks to keep that in mind. And lastly, we'll do a quick overview on how IMAGINiT engages with customers around learning and development, and field a few questions near the end. So let's kick right to it. Let's do the quick introduction here. My name is David Dang. I've been with IMAGINiT for almost a year now. And prior to that, I've been in many roles, like in account management for simulation, for CFD FEA simulation, and then maybe a decade's worth of experience around operations, HR, purchasing, accounting, essentially developing good processes. And part of that includes learning and development. So I have my own experiences, but I'm very excited to introduce Scott Wolslager, who we're going to have get a bit of his thoughts here during this webinar as well. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Wolslager, and I run our engagement team at IMAGINiT. Obviously, I manage a team, so learning and continuous learning is important for me as a manager to make sure that my team is staying engaged and understanding technology trends and just industry trends in general, and it's been a passion of mine. Been with IMAGINiT for about 18 years. I've been in the AEC industry for about 30 years, always working on technology and improvement projects within organizations. So training, learning, development, continuous improvement have been focus areas for almost my entire 30-year career, and excited to talk to everyone today.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much, Scott. We're looking forward to get your thoughts here on the industry and learning development. So we have a little bit of data here. So we'll discuss a little bit more about the industry. Sorry, let me go back. Kelsey, we have the poll results. Is that correct? Were you able to put them together? Okay.
Yes, we do. Are you able to see those?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So what do we have here? So again, thank you so much for taking the time to do the poll results. So the first question is, do you encourage employees to take training courses to advance their skills? 95% of you said yes, 5% say no. So this is a really good group of people that we have here, Scott, that are organizations that want to do some learning and development, which that's fantastic. I wish I could say it's more common, but I guess since you're in a webinar where we're talking about learning development, and this is more of the norm. Question number 2, do you currently have a training plan in place for your employees? Yes, 45% internally, yes with external party, 38% creating, 21% of you are creating one, and then 17% say no. Interesting. Question 3, how do your employees find out about training opportunities? I assist my team, 73%, on their own, 47%, third party, 33%, and then no encouragement. So it looks like the majority of the people here are very much involved in training opportunities for their team. Fantastic. Do you measure the results of your employees' training? Yes, accurately 10%, yes, but inaccurately 3%, no 71%, and then 16% nothing to measure. Wow, that's really interesting. That's some interesting topic. Scott, I can see that you probably have some thoughts just from the poll results here.
Yeah, I think the number jumped out at me as the 71% said no to the measurement category, and I think that's a challenge in a lot of organizations. Is at the end of the year, somebody says, if we spent all this money on learning, what did it do for our organization? And it's sometimes hard to quantify, and you can measure it in all different types of ways. And today we hope to give you some framework as to some ways to help you measure to show that it does provide value to the organization. I think everybody recognizes in general that training, learning, development provides value to the organization. It's just quantifying it is difficult. So, I often say is if somebody spends 5% of their time learning or 10% of their time learning, what does it mean to the organization as a whole and as an individual participating in the organization and their productivity or their job satisfaction or many other factors that could go into those considerations that we'll talk about throughout this webinar.
Fantastic. All right. Kelsey, can I have control again? And hopefully I'm sharing the right screen this time. Let's see here.
Yep, looks good.
Looks good. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about industry trends. So this is what, Scott and I, we work with a lot of different organizations, and we met together and talked with other peers of what's kind of happening that we're seeing here. One of the big things that really impacted the world is COVID-19. Even after 2 years afterwards, we're seeing a greater urgency to set up remote infrastructure. How do we create, learning development solutions? But it's also driving hiring and retention challenges. You might have heard the Great Resignation. We see a lot of people moving from organization to organization, and some different companies work a little bit differently. So it's interesting to see how talent is moving in this time at the moment. And during this time, we're also seeing a lot of senior employee burnout, or at least that's what I call it, and inefficient training strategies we'll discuss more later on. Now, we're seeing a big stress around senior level employees picking up the slack when someone leaves the organization. So there's just more work to kind of pass around, and we're seeing a lot of burnout in that area. And then lastly here, I think there's a realization where Band-Aid fixes are being done instead of trying to really dig into the root of those issues, right? In this example, I'm talking about CAD standards, but maybe just certain processes that need to be in place so that the company could be more effective. And we're seeing these type of Band-Aids, fixes starting to see some challenges, as there's more strain within organizations. So Scott, I was kind of curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think all these are all happening, and I have the privilege of talking to lots of different customers in IMAGINIT's customer base and lots of different types of organizations, and I kind of hear these trends everywhere, and we can see them in our company as well, and I manage to these things on my team as well. And the burnout part, I think, is we've all read about Zoom meeting burnout, and we're sitting on one now. In a sense, we go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, or we go to productivity items for our positions, and we often work in this remote world that we don't stop and say, okay, how can I develop my skills today or tomorrow, or what am I going to do next week that's different? So there's strategies that you can put in place to encourage learning, because it is actually a break from the day-to-day grind of Zoom meetings and productivity things. I encourage people on my team, take 15 minutes a day to try to learn something. I don't really care what it is. Just try to read something that's interesting to you. Know what the best time is. Watch a video. Watch something that will teach you something that will help you in your career or in your development, your skill sets. So that's a good break away from the mundane tasks of meeting after meeting some days.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of these trends, and learning development has been something that's been more of a conversation as a way to kind of fight back these type of hiring and retention challenges. Now, the next slide I have here, talks a little bit more about the some stats that we're seeing, in the market here, and this is a good way to arm people with some information on how people feel around training and learning development. When we see the first two, 35% of millennials consider training and development programs as a top benefit they would want from a company, and employees who feel they cannot develop their career goals are 12 times more likely to leave the company. Now, it's with greater, stress or, the shifting around of people, we're kind of seeing, the lack of the failure of these trainings, right? Causing people to leave and not able to hit their goals, or not really framing up, having resources to really improve themselves. And this is something that we're also seeing within Gen Z as well. So that's a trend we're seeing. Also, companies that invest $1,500 on training can see an average of 24% more profit than companies who invested less. And then in a study of more than 3,100 U.S. workplace, a 10% increase in educational development produced an 8.6 gain in productivity, right? So, we're seeing, some small amount of investment gaining, with the ability to gain more results. And, these are information that, that you should share with other people. It's a really interesting field of study when in terms of the impact of training for companies. So Scott, I was kind of curious to see if you had any sort of thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think all these things are, valid points as to the why to invest in training, and they're equally probably each important. I tend to probably fall in the bucket of the dollar amount that you invest per employee, and the amount of money that you spend on that employee. And sometimes companies, I think almost every organization, and I shouldn't say not every organization, almost a lot of organizations have tuition reimbursement programs, for instance, but they don't always have a tuition reimbursement for continuous learning outside of a collegiate atmosphere. So I always tell other managers in our company and other managers that I work with, I think it's equal in a lot of ways, is that continuous learning, whether it be at the collegiate level or through seminars, webinars, online learning opportunities, in-person class training type things, events that you go to. There's all these different sources of learning that you can get in. How do we allocate the appropriate amount of money for the employee development, which ultimately helps this millennial category of 35% of these people want continuous learning. And so all these kind of work together in my mind. But thinking about your investment into each employee is definitely important, because you want to measure your value of your training based upon that at the end of the year generally.
Yeah, and especially with millennials, I think more conversations I'm having is around business type of development or acumen, management type things, because millennials are they're pushing late 30s now, mid 30s, late 30s. So a lot of those organizations are hiring millennials for more leadership type roles, and it seems like in my conversations, more and more conversations are brought up around creating a strong learning and development program. Now I'm going to go to the next slide here. So there are a few challenges of certain learning programs that I've been kind of seeing, and they kind of fall into two buckets. So you have the informal learning program, which is it's kind of your 2-week on-the-job type training. Typically, you see this with smaller organizations. And as a result, there's a pressure between the individual contributor and training new employees. So the employee who's trained these new people have their own day job, right? And we're seeing more of a pressure between, hey, we're hiring on more people, yet we also have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of pressure that we're seeing between the two roles for that employee. And also there's challenges in creating a positive experience for the employee. I remember one of my first jobs, the training was essentially here's 2 weeks of training and on the job, and then boom, you're trained for life. You're set. There's nothing more that you could possibly learn. But we know the reality, and that's not the case. There's always opportunities for learning. So, and sometimes I see a lot of companies kind of fail in being proactive in this way. The second thing that I've been seeing is the formal learning programs with a dedicated trainer. This is larger, medium to larger size organizations where you have a trainer who build an in-house curriculum with their best practices. The big challenge that we typically see about that is that with technology changing, we're seeing that the curriculum oftentimes go really much out of date, right, by the next release, right? And there's always new technologies that's coming out, and a lot of challenges around there. The other shift to, and maybe there's not a challenge as much as an opportunity, is the ability to have higher level of visibility and meeting individual needs through reports, dashboards, and assessments. We're seeing bigger trends towards leveraging assessments to allow students to take assessments and then see where they are at in terms of skill level, because most organizations I've been seeing, they're hiring people that have these skills, but how good are their skills? We don't know, right? Unless we assess them and then figure out where they're at, and then we could build training specifically for them. In these formal learning programs, they're typically all in the same classroom, learning the same content. There's also higher expectations for success as well, that there's justification in terms of the investment is made. I was talking to another company where he told me that when he took on this role to train his employees, he kind of had to justify himself as an expense worth keeping, right, and continuing to do so. So we're seeing a lot of these type of pressures as well, saying, hey, how can we be effective in terms of our learning development? Scott, I was kind of curious to see if this is something that you're seeing as well, or what are your thoughts in terms of these program types?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic because there's all sorts of things that could fall into that informal learning category, and there's lots of things that could fall into the formal category. The informal is challenging in some ways because anybody could go out and create a YouTube video about doing something or how to do something. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's it's just that person's opinion on how to do that. And I've spent many hours of watching videos on YouTube about various topics, about just about everything in my life. From things to how to fix a dishwasher to how to fix a plumbing trap, just miscellaneous stuff. And in some videos you watch and you go, not any better after watching that video than I was before I watched that video. I didn't learn anything. Content was not easy to follow. It wasn't relevant to what I was trying to accomplish. So there's that kind of waste of time informal training that people can do, or informal learning that can do. And then there's also the informal learning that you get through the day at your normal position, talking to coworkers, working with coworkers, items like that, where that training is or learning is absolutely valid and irreplaceable, and you probably won't replace that ever. It's part of life, and it's part of something that is there. I think what formal training programs, and one of the values that people don't really consider in that is that if you have a really good formal training program in your organization, you can probably recruit people with less skills than maybe a company that does not, because you can fill the skill gap with if you have a good training program in place to teach them the processes that you all accomplish or that you need to do. And they can do it on their self-paced instead of having a senior person sitting over their shoulder or whatever the case may be. But having some type of assessment to know where the employee is, where you need them to be able to contribute on projects in the way that you need to be able to contribute on, and how to fill the gaps is really the need for a formal program. And we hear this every day is, people ask me is, where can I find good people? Well, they're not really easy to find today. So you have to either train people that are maybe perhaps younger or perhaps from a different industry coming to your industry, trying to learn, instead of designing restaurants, I'm now designing hospitals. I need to know the differences and, how to use the tools that need to perform my job. So all those things need to be are considered in these training programs, I believe.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, especially around the assessment piece. I mean, that's becoming more and more. When you take an assessment, you have an idea of where that person's at, and you could actually personalize training based upon how they score, which is very unique now, and it's actually not too difficult to do. But yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more some trends around e-learning, right? So we see that 42, an average employee receives 42 hours of training, but there's something called microlearning. And what is microlearning? Well, we know it's 17% more efficient. We know it reduced development cost by 50%, improves speed of development by 300%. But what is it? So microlearning is defined as 3, 4, 5 minutes, or even 1 minute of training chunks that you learn at a time. And over a longer period of time, you're learning piece by piece. And instead of a big, 40-hour blast, you're learning a little bit at a time. We're seeing that there's a lot more retention when organizations are using these type of bite-sized trainings. And it's been really interesting to see the results because I know how I used to think of training was the idea of going through 80 hours worth of training, and once you hit that, you take some quizzes, and then boom, you're ready to go. But we're seeing more of this type of trend, even in terms of companies developing their own like micro learning short videos for the onboarding and continuing education process. Lastly, we're also seeing that companies are investing over $1,000 per employee per year, and we're seeing that number actually rising. There's been a trend of that rising the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and that's before all the inflation piece as well. But yeah, I was kind of curious in terms of your thoughts in terms of micro learning, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, micro learning is definitely the trend that's here to stay. And I think that one of the challenges in the micro learning industry is kind of my comment earlier about the YouTube type situation, or unauthorized publishers of information that they just share with people. And is it accurate? Is it what you want somebody to? Is it the way you want somebody to do things in your organization? And everybody's a little bit different. What's applicable to here may not be applicable to that organization, or maybe this person just gave bad advice, or perhaps YouTube doesn't do anything really to remove content. Maybe somebody watched a video for how to do something in Revit 2005 and do it the same way in Revit 2021, and there's been a lot of changes in the software since then. So having relevant content is probably the most important thing when it comes to micro learning in my mind, and making sure the quality of the content stays relevant to the times, and quality checking that information on a regular basis, that content on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. One more piece on microlearning before I move on. My favorite story is that microlearning is great. You watch a video for 2 minutes, and then someone taps you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I need help on something," and that happens over and over and over. So, it seems like most people can't even sit through, a half hour or even 15 minutes, right, video without being interrupted. We're definitely seeing a lot more interruptions. So, the webinar is learning about how to measure the value of learning. And before our conversation, Scott, before we hosted this webinar, you guys shared with me Kirkpatrick's model, and I've heard of Kirkpatrick's model, but I didn't really understand what I knew. It was like some sort of model for learning. So I was kind of curious to see if you could share it with me again in terms of what is Kirkpatrick's model.
Yeah, so Kirkpatrick's model is a model that was developed by a gentleman named Donald Kirkpatrick back in the 50s, actually. And it's a framework. It's not this is exactly how you do it. It's a framework that you can put in place, and you can put pieces of this in place to help measure and understand the value of training in your organization. And going back to the initial survey, 71% of the people in this seminar have no way of or don't measure the value of training in learning in your organization. And the interesting thing about the Kirkpatrick model to me, and the reason I've used it throughout my entire 30-year career pretty much, is that it's adaptable to situations. And we were just talking about micro learning, and this was initially developed before micro learning was ever even thought of as a context of how to deliver. So to just kind of dive into the details a little bit about the Kirkpatrick model, and what does this all mean. So there's 4 levels to the Kirkpatrick model by definition of Donald Kirkpatrick in the 50s. There's been some changes to this model over the years that other people have added or removed to this. And again, this is a framework. It's not necessarily set in stone. This is how you have to do it. This is how you can think about it. This is how you can design your system to help quantify the value that learnings bring into your organization. And then also it also kind of provides a framework for you to help manage people underneath you of saying, okay, this is why training is important and learning is important to you in doing your daily duties as an employee of this company. So I'm going to start backwards on this because this model is, like I said, flexible, but I'm going to start backwards on the results side, because I think that in any enterprise training, any big or small company, it's important to think about what results are you trying to achieve. And if you don't think about the results you're trying to achieve before you kind of figure out the evaluation, learning, and behavior part, you might be measuring the wrong things, and you might be trying to establish value in the wrong ways. So to give you an example here is, if I want my employees, maybe I have an employee that isn't as utilized on projects work than another employee. Why is that the case? I need to improve that one employee's skill set in some area so that he or she becomes more valuable to other projects in the organization, so they become more utilized. And what are those skill sets? So that would be like a measurement point, right? Is I need to close the gap on an employee's skill sets because they're not utilized in our organization on all the number of projects that they need. There's hard skills that you could measure, but that really often doesn't have an apparent value to the organization at the end of the day. There's health and safety measures that might be important. Is, hey, we want to reduce our injuries on construction sites by 90% by the end of the year because we had too many this year. That's a hard number that you can quantify and you can get to. So you want to think about what is quantifiable and what is important to you in your organizations to be able to add up and encourage employees to get to. So once you figure out, what are the value KPIs for me, how do we get there and how do we start measuring those? So if we look at evaluation, everyone probably on this phone call has done a training evaluation in their history. If you've taken a training classes, after class, you go through a survey that asks you about the course. Was a good course for you? Did you learn something? Was the instructor clear? Were the materials presented in a way that you'll be able to use it in your job? Questions like that. And obviously somebody that says, no, this is a waste of my time, versus somebody answers the question, yes, this was, that there's different value perceptions there, or perspectives from those two people to the value of that training in the organization. From the evaluation point, then the next step is to understand the evaluation or the learning side as to what is different. So this is where assessments can come in, and there's there's really two different ways you can do this as well. As one, you can take an assessment of a person's skills prior to the training course or the micro learning section that they're doing to see what they know before, and then you can test them again after to see if that gap got closed, and then you can say, okay, this skill is needed for this position, and this adds actual value to the organization and to the employee's skill set to be more productive at the end of the day in their jobs. So oftentimes people skip the pretest because they're going to do the learning anyways, or the micro learning, whatever it is. So go through the micro learning and they only do the post test. This is one of those areas where you have to kind of decide as how much effort and time you think it is important to put into this for your organization. Level 3, this is the one that I think that it goes unsaid and untouched too often in organizations. So there's a behavior thing that happens with learning and training. Is generally speaking, everyone takes a training or learning session to do something differently. And what is it? What are you doing differently after you took that training? And is it making you a more productive employee? Is it making you do your job better? Is it making you make less mistakes in your job? What are the behavior things that you're changing? And the one thing that I would say that people I think forget in this side is they forget to measure the long-term effect on that. They might and you can do this in a lot of different ways, but one common way to find this out is whether or not it changed behavior is to do a poll or survey, 1 month after somebody went to a training and said, hey, did it change your job? Are you more productive? How much more productive are you? Are you saving an hour a week, 10 hours a week, 5 minutes a week? What changed in your behavior, and what's changed in how you perform in your job? And then also measuring that 1 year later is also important. Did that behavior not only change after a month, but it actually continued improvement, and now their behavior is really different 11 months later, and now they're up to saving 5 hours a week that they never thought they had before, and they're able to contribute on more projects than they ever were, and their utilization number is now, and their billable number is now 20% higher than it was before. So all of those things kind of add up to the end of the day, the results that you're trying to drive, and figure out where the quantifying is of the dollar amount for each individual employee. And it's important, I think, to do this on an individual and a team level as far as a manager goes. This is how I think about it with my team is, how much more utilization am I getting from my team by cross-training them in things that they didn't know about in the previous year.
That's really good. Yeah, it sounds like, it's almost like building a culture because you're reinforcing those best practices, right? By testing year over year.
Well, it's important it's important for employees to understand. I'll use the example. When I was really young, I was probably fresh out of college kind of thing, and I took a training class on Bentley Geopack, actually it was. And I went through the training class, and this was, I don't know, probably about 1995 or so. And it was when Geopack first came out. And that training class, I got out of it, and I went back to my job, and I didn't change any of my behavior because I didn't have the software installed. The company that I worked for didn't buy the software yet. We didn't have enough licenses. It was like 3 months later, I got the software finally, and I started trying to use it, and I couldn't remember anything from the training class that I attended. And it was like, it was negative ROI, a negative value on training to the organization. They wasted, $2,000 on or more on sending me to a training class that I wasn't able to change any behavior or drive any results that the company wanted at the end of the day. The results they wanted was they wanted me to go, be a more productive employee with using Geopack. Well, I didn't achieve those results, and it really was a waste of money. So if my company would understand, if I probably would have understood the results that they wanted from it, I would have said, oh, if I don't have the software, hold on, let's do the training, 3 months from now, because it's not the right time for me to do this today. It's a different perspective to think of, because most employees don't want to learn things that they're not going to be able to utilize or use in their jobs because it makes them unproductive. So aligning the employee goals with the organization does nothing but better for the organization itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it also sounds like, the problem with measuring results, you can't even hit measuring results or even get to stage 4 unless you really nail down the first 3. Is that correct? Like in that case, in your story, it was like you weren't even get to 2, right?
Yeah. Or you have to pick yours. Like, not every training program or every learning program needs to go through all 4 of these steps. It's a framework, right? And you can say, okay, the behavior and results are really my 2 key things that I want to focus in on, because if behavior changes, that we know is going to drive results, and maybe even forget about the other 2. it's really kind of dependent on your organization and what the results and your KPIs that you determine are. I think most people probably tend to focus on the 3 and 4 area. But I can tell you from the level 1, I'm going to use another example here that just popped into my head is another early in my career situation where I used to do training as well, and I trained. I was conducting an AutoCAD training class, and I had 7 students in the class, and this one student, every time we got to a practice exercise, would get up and walk out the room and go outside and smoke cigarettes instead of doing the exercise. After the class, like the next week, his manager called my boss and said, well, this employee didn't learn anything at the class and said it was a waste of his time. I said, well, my boss came to me and asked me, what happened? And I said, well, every time we went to do an exercise, the person just went outside and walked and smoked cigarettes. He didn't do anything. He didn't practice anything. So I'm not exactly sure how he expected to learn without practicing anything. My manager had a conversation with the other manager and myself, and I had the frank conversation and that person understood the why then. So that's why evaluations are important in a sense. Is if a person has a negative perspective on an event they went to or a thing that they went to, they're not going to learn. And you can go back to that and you can understand, hey, this person had a negative perception of that. Why? And how do we fix it? Is it fixable?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I know I work with our implementation team, and we have these type of discussions all the time. I'm pretty sure a lot of people on this call can think of some people who who you're kind of wondering like, I wonder if this person's actually going to pick this up, right? Maybe not. I think it's one of those things where you have to have a conversation with people who've done this type of work and kind of give advice and feedback to how to improve the learning development practices. So really good stuff. I should have led up into this a little bit better, but encourage continued learning. If you've worked with me, I'm all about continued education. I don't believe that the first 2 weeks in joining an organization, that's all you're learning. We are always continuing to learn. Now, how that looks like, it depends, right? And you could see here in the learning development use case, you kind of have the now, which is using search tools, using handling technical support, how-to documents, videos. So these are instances where you are, hey, I ran into an issue. I need to go to a resource that I could trust, right? So that is considered continued learning, right? And this is a good thing for someone to be able to say, hey, I'm gonna spend 5 minutes figuring it out, 5 minutes to talk to a colleague, and then 5 minutes to talk to a subject matter expert. I've actually talked to so many people who said, hey, I guess to go straight to that person. And the people who are here right now, they are probably that person, right? You probably would hope that they would be able to figure it out before they go straight there. They call it 555, but in another organization we call it 005. We just go straight to the subject matter expert. So I thought it was kind of funny when I talked to a few, of our clients about this. Now the next point would be around, hey, how do we take courses? This is taking time away to do some more of your learning, right? The typical coursework, record webcasts. How do we, create workflows? And then next would be something considered, hey, I want to go to a senior level position, or I want to be a manager. I want to take more comprehensive learning courses that might include business skills, skills development, knowledge capture, and sharing. And you'll see at the bottom here, we do have a solution that covers all that. But regardless, that's something that you should really consider in these 3 use cases. So I was kind of curious to see, Scott, do you agree, or any other thoughts in terms of these use cases?
I absolutely agree. I'm a now person personally. I do a lot of training when I need it, and a lot of learning when I need to know the information, because my memory is not what it used to be when I was 21 years old. So I do a lot of the now training, but the soon and the next is, from a management perspective, for me is also important. Is understanding where each of my team members' skill sets are, and helping them plan out the soon and next steps for their development, and making sure that we all are in agreement as to the amount of time
Mhm.
that that's going to take, and then how I am going to help them get there, or how they're going to get there on their own. So without that kind of alignment of understanding, okay, I need to learn this so I can work on this type of project. I need to develop this skill so that I can contribute more to these types of projects. You're never really going to get there, and you're never going to allocate the time to do it. And allocating time is difficult when you say, I need to do this all in 1 week. But if you can plan out, hey, this is what we think your next 6 months are going to look like from a learning and development standpoint, and the employees bought in, managers bought in, it makes much more value and easy to see the results at the end of that 6 months of this is what happened. Everything was tracked, report on it, and we can see their development is obvious and measure those results that we talked about in the Kirkpatrick model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are really good frameworks to think about. And I hope everyone finds this to be pretty helpful because, I work with a lot of organizations and sometimes it's not a framework, right? They just say, let's do a class on something. We do lunch and learns, right? And there's not really kind of different bullet points or framework to work our learning development, right? And oftentimes, you can figure it out yourself, or you could work with an organization like IMAGINiT to kind of have a discussion around how to improve your learning and development. So kind of going to the next slides here of how we typically partner at IMAGINiT. We identify challenges that you might have and then quantify it, right? In terms of, okay, how many people need this training? Can we assess them to see, okay, are they hitting this percentage in terms of their score in terms of Revit skills? We analyze this information and then we can execute a plan based upon the type of needs that are there, right? And maybe the execution plan is probably the assessment, right? And then implementing a learning platform on top of that. We also partner in terms of adopting and measuring success in these areas, right? I think the reason it's so hard to come up with results is that a lot of organizations typically try to do it by themselves, and it's challenging. Luckily for us, we have a great team here that help our customers think of really good ideas in terms of, that laggard or the person who's resisting, what are good ways to engage them so that they could be productive, right? Scott, do you have any thoughts here as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to your thought about the lunch and learns and things, and that's a common strategy that I hear for organizations. Oh, we do lunch and learns, once a month, and lunch learns can be valuable tools, right? But you're also making the assumption in a lot of lunch and learns that everybody is at a certain level of knowledge and everybody's the same, and that measuring the result of something like that, back to the Kirkpatrick model, is very difficult. And then there's also the challenge of just developing that content and keeping it up to date for people down the road. So yeah, we at IMAGINiT, our team is here to help organizations implement continuous learning programs, technology advancements. We do lots of content development using a proven methodology, and happy to help out wherever we can in organizations.